Good afternoon, the internet. It's Josiah again with another short little video about a philosophy idea. So I saw a thing online, real men don't cry, or some similar thread. And these days, because everything you see is based on what the algorithm thinks will get your engagement, we always see these normative claims of, especially gender attribution, like every person of this gender should act like X. It's always about somebody being bullied or someone's outraged about the inherent bullying to these sorts of claims. You know, the and if this is the sort of thing that interests you, you could look up, no real Irishman. It's a, canonical fallacy out there in the world. And the thing about these sorts of normative claims about how people ought to be, that if you do X, then you're not really a woman. If you don't do Y, you're not really a man. Those sorts of just bumper sticker, boilerplate, bullying, normative enforcement used to be about something, and it used to be about something important. Because when we lived in a traditional society, which is a term I can define if anybody cares, but when we lived in traditional societies, those societies were stable for so long that the common wisdom of how one ought to act could aggregate and finish and become these very simple things like real men don't cry. And in that kind of environment, there's a sort of wisdom there that the reason that real men don't cry is because if you had a masculine role in that society and you did the non-masculine stuff, it was a good sign that you were actually going to be bad at the things that mattered, right? And it was a way to guide people, coercively, admittedly, but a way to guide people towards the virtues that were relevant to the culture at large. And it is not just our enlightenment that has made those kinds of coercive norms a thing of the past. It's not just for the good that we're not supposed to say that anymore. It's actually more a function of the fact that our culture is so unstable and so protean that no one knows what virtues are going to matter next week. No one's really sure what virtues matter now, because no one's been through this before. In a civilization where everybody had been farming the same way for 400 years, you could go to your grandparents and ask them anything, and they had all the answers because the answers hadn't changed. If you're 20 right now and you go to your grandparents for wisdom, they're really not going to be able to do what they should be able to do, which is just tell you what worked when they were a kid. Right? You need someone to try and figure out all of this very robustly complicated, nuanced stuff, because the culture has changed a lot in the last 60 years. And the stuff that worked 60 years ago won't work now. And there's no source of wisdom. Now, when you had that sort of source of wisdom in a traditional environment, if you didn't fit into that traditional environment, you were screwed. There was no hope for you. There was no way for people to bridge that gap. You had to fit into the mold or you were done for. But the fact that we can now have a society where if you are a rank first-class weirdo, we can make space for you, that's great. But it has come at the cost of everyone having to think for themselves about themselves. And to think, well, what does it mean to be a man? Does it mean anything? And this is the sort of challenge that we've created for ourselves that I'm not sure we've prepared ourselves for. Right? And this goes back to Nietzsche, who knew everything, seemingly, in 1880. God is dead. And that's actually a big problem. No matter how many freedoms it gives us, some of those freedoms comes with the cost of the labor to make sense of the world in the face of those freedoms. Right? Because it may suck that men can't cry in a traditional framework, but it isn't great that everyone has to figure out for themselves every day, all the time, and no one knows the right answer when they want to know how to be a man, or whatever role you want to fit into, or whatever role you want to make up, or whatever roles you want to avoid, right? We have that freedom to do that, but it is also simultaneously an obligation. And that's not purely for the good. Net, I think it's good. I like weirdos. I am a weirdo. I like that we can go out into the world and find niches for ourselves or create them. But it comes at a cost. And some of the traditional values that we are rightly outraged about how they get used served a purpose that doesn't get mentioned by anybody who isn't already sold on them.